Hello everyone, my name is Victor Gomez. I am currently in my final year of the BAS in Computer Technology and Software Development program at Valencia College. My project is called The Winning Formula. The purpose of this project is to analyze scoring patterns and team performance during the opening stage of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. For this project, I collected much data from a World Cup API, stored the data in an SQLite database, and used Python to analyze and visualize the results. The main question I wanted to explore was whether there was a relationship between how many goals a team scored and its ability to win matches. About the project. At a high level, this project collects and analyzes World Cup match data. The data includes information such as the teams playing, the goals scored by each team, the group, the match day, and the information about the individual goals scored during each match. For this project, I focused specifically on the first 68 matches, which represents the opening stage of the tournament that I analyzed during a 2 week span. The basic process was to first retrieve the match data from the API. I then processed the data using Python and saved the relevant information into an SQLite database, saved in my local computer. After that, I used the database to perform my analysis and create visualizations showing score patterns and team performance. The main goal was not just to display the match results, but to use the data to identify patterns between scoring and winning. Languages and tools. I used several different languages and tools to complete this project. The main programming language I used was Python. Python was used to retrieve the API data, process the data, and perform calculations and create the visualizations. I used the request library to communicate with the API and retrieve the World Cup match data. I used SQLite as the database where I stored the match information. I used SQLite Studio to view and manage the databases and verify that the data was being stored correctly. I used Pandas inside Python to load and organize the data for analysis. I used Matplotlib in Python as well to create the charts and graphs for the project. I finally used the IntelliJ IDEA as my development environment to write and run my Python code. Together, these tools allowed me to create a complete process from collecting the data to storing it, analyzing it, and finally visualizing the results. Implementation. The implementation of my project changed somewhat as I worked through the project. My original plan was to collect data and analyze scoring patterns and team performance. However, as I worked with the API, I realized that the available data could support a more specific analysis. I decided to focus my project on the first 68 matches of the first 2 weeks of the tournament, rather than analyzing every match available through the API. I also narrowed the research question to focus more specifically on the relationship between scoring and winning. Instead of simply asking which team scored the most goals, I wanted to determine whether teams that scored more goals were consistently more likely to win. This change gave the project a more specific direction and allowed me to compare the scoring data directly with the match outcomes. Now, findings and results. So this is the data that I collected. As you can see here, we have the highest scoring teams during the group stage were France, Germany, and the Netherlands. All of them scored 10 goals. Pretty much all the teams scored at least one goal, except for Panama down here at the bottom. They scored no goals. As you can see, most of the performance of the teams were very even. Most of the teams scored the same amount of goals. And in the next graph here, we can see the performance of all the teams. So as you can see here, a team like France, which was the highest scoring team, actually was able to win all their games. Here we have a little legend. So the blue sections are wins, the orange ones are draws, and the red ones are losses. So the only two teams that won all their games during the group stage were France and Mexico. Mexico actually didn't wasn't in the highest scoring teams here. They actually scored only 6 goals, which actually exemplifies one of the beautiful things about football, which is you don't need to score many goals each and every game in order to win matches. Mexico only had to score 6. You only have to score one more than your rival at the time to win the game. Because if you see here, both Germany, that also scored 10 goals, they actually just won 2 of their games and not all three because 7 of their 10 goals came from one match against Curacao. So not only that, but we can also see a team like Portugal who scored 6 goals, the same amount as Mexico, but they actually, where are they? Here. They only win one game and they draw the other two, which means that most of their goals, in the case of Portugal, they scored 5 out of their 6 goals in just one game, and they didn't really score the other two. Challenges. I faced several technical challenges during the development of the project. The first major challenge was connecting to the API. So initially, I wanted to connect to two particular APIs that had both a free plan and a paid plan. The problem is the data for this particular tournament was locked behind the paid plans. The free plan had access to the previous World Cup, which is not relevant to this one. So I had to either pay for the access to the data or find a free API that had the data. So I went for the other option. I found another API right here. So this one is free and open source. I can get all of my information without having to pay, and I have all of the teams, all of the groups, all of the matches. So that solved that problem. Now, besides that, another challenge I had was working with the API data itself. The API contained more matches than I wanted to analyze, so I had to make sure that I was selecting the correct 68 matches for my project. I also had to troubleshoot the transition between my SQLite database and my Python analysis scripts. And I finally had to work through several visualization issues, including properly labeling the charts, displaying all of the themes, and making sure that the graphs were easy to read. Successes and disappointments. One of my biggest successes was getting the entire data pipeline working. I was able to successfully retrieve data from the external API, store that data in SQLite, retrieve it from the database, analyze it using pandas, and create visualizations using Matplotlib. Another success was narrowing the project down to a specific research question about the relationship between scoring and winning. Because at first my concept was a little bit too broad and too excessive for the amount of time I had available and for the nature of the project. This made the project more meaningful because I was not just presenting statistics, I was using the data to identify a specific pattern. My biggest disappointment was the API data that was not always as clean or consistent as I expected. As I said before, the two APIs that I had in mind didn't work out in the end, so I had to adapt to that situation and find an API that actually worked for what I needed it to do. Some of the player names and scored information contain formatting or encoding issues, which I had to fix as well, which made that part of the data more difficult to work with. Another disappointment was that the project initially had a broader scope, as I said, and I had to narrow it down as I worked with the actual data available in the API. However, narrowing the scope ultimately helped me create a more focused analysis. Project do-over. If I were to do this project over again, I would start by defining the exact research question and data requirements before actually beginning the data collection process. Since I had something in mind at first, but then when I actually got to work to try to make it a reality, it didn't pan out the way I wanted it to do. So I had to basically rethink what I wanted to do in order to have something functional. I would also spend more time researching and testing the API before building the rest of the project around it. Another thing I would change is collecting more historical data instead of analyzing only the first 68 matches. I would collect data from previous World Cups or from the entire 2026 tournament. This would allow me to compare scoring and winning patterns across different tournaments and determine whether the patterns I found in this project are consistent over time. I would also try to improve the quality of the player and scorer data by cleaning the text and standardizing names before storing it in the database. This would make the database more reliable and allow me for more detailed analysis of individual player performance. Now I'm going to demonstrate how the project works. So here is the SQLite database. As you can see, I have a lot of information here. The I have each row is a match of the group stage. So we have our home team, the away team, the score from the home team and the away team, my scorers of the home team, the one from the away team. Here we don't have any scorer because then South Africa didn't score any goal. We have a group name, a match day, and the match date. So the way this works, so here's the actual code. I initially wanted to do Java because that's the language I have more experience with, but it got a little too messy for my liking. I have never worked with APIs before. I saw that many people in the class were using Python, so I looked into it, and yeah, it's a lot simpler. It's just a couple lines. So I adapted to that as well, and I went into Python here. So very simple. Here's my URL, which is the GitHub repo I showed before. I try to connect to the URL to get the I do my GET request. I print the status onto the console down here. I have my response.json assigned to my data variable. And here I have my games variable that gets all of the data from the JSON. And I print all the total matches just to make sure that I'm getting the number of matches that I want. Here I make my SQLite database. I call it worldcup.db, which is this one right here. And I make my connection. And inside the database, I create my table. As I showed before, the ID, thankfully the API call already has an identifier, a unique identifier to have my primary key. And then I have my home team, away team, and all of the columns that I showed before in SQLite, right there, right here. This already comes in the raw data, so I just assigned columns to it. And then I go in and I insert all of the information into the columns. And then I commit the connection and then I close it. For the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to delete the database. Oh, sorry about that. So I'm going to disconnect from the database. I'm going to remove it from the list. Then I'm going into here. I'm going to delete it from here. And then when I run main.py, is going to do the API call, is going to create the database and going to create the table, and it's going to put all of the information from the JSON file into the database. As you can see, it gives me a status 200, which is the OK status. 104 matches were pulled, which is the entire tournament. I only need the first 68. And it tells me that it's been saved successfully. So as you can see here, the database is back into my project structure. If I go into SQLite and I add a database, I look for it in my project folder. It's right here. I select it, hit OK. It's right here. I connect to it, select the table, go into data, and we have the exact same data that we had before, meaning that this is working as intended. Now, analysis PY is simply me trying to make sure that I can pull the data from the SQLite table back into Python. So if I run this, I'm using Pandas, the Pandas library for this. I connect to my workup database, and then I simply query all the information from the matches table. So I run this, and I'm going to get the first 5 rows of data. Not all of the columns, because I don't want to, I just need to know that it works. I don't need to display the entire contents of the rows. So I have the total matches that I want to pull, and I have all my columns here. So that is working. And finally, I go into visualization py.py, which is where I pull or I query all the information from the table. And with that information, I take the things that I need to get my visualization going. So I connect to the database, query all the data. Once I have it in my df variable, I close the connection, and then I calculate my total goals, which is the home score plus away score, because I need them to for one of the graphs. So I initially had a graph for the average goals per match. I still have it actually. So because of that, I need to know what the total amount of goals per match was. So I create my figure here using that information. I went for a bar graph. I I put the labels on it, and I then add the values to each of the graphs, to each of the bars in the graphs. Then I put my labels on them, put a title into it, and then display it just like this. So these are all of the graphs that I generated. This is the first one, the one I was talking about. So as you can see here, we have all of the total goals per match from 1 to 68. So you can see the World Cup itself was the highest scoring tournament in history for the World Cup. So we only have uh, six six matches with no goals in them. Other than that, all of the other matches had a lot of goals in them. This one right here was the one that I was talking about before, which was Germany. Germany scored 7 goals, Curacao scored 1 goal. That was basically all of the goals Germany scored in the tournament, which is why they didn't win it. So I repeat the same process for all of the other graphs. This one is goals by team. I grab the goals from each team, whether that's if they're playing as home, or they're scoring, or they are playing as the away team. Add them together, make sure that I don't have repeat teams. I combine both of the scores, and then I go into here, and I add them together. I sort them from high to low and display them like this in a gradient form so it's easier to read. That is this part right here. And here I put again the labels and these things here, so it's easier to read which team scored however many goals. And yeah, then I just repeat the same process for all of the other ones. To create the other graphs right here. Here is the average goals per match day. The first match day is the average goal scored was 3.12. So basically the teams play 3 games each. Those are called match days. So match day 1 is the first match that each team played. The second one is the second one, and the third is the third, obviously. So the first one is higher because teams want to get the first 3 points as quickly as possible. Generally speaking, to advance from the group stage, you need at least 4 points. So teams are very encouraged to win the first game they have. That way, the other 2 games, they are only looking for a draw instead of a victory, which is why in the second match day, the teams that scored the most goals and won the first game are not as pressured to go for the victory in the second match, which is why the average drops down significantly. And on the third match day, the teams that are close to those 4 points are trying to win those games. So if they have 1 point or 2 points, they know that they are obligated to win the last game. So they have to play at the offensive and try to get that victory however way they can, which is why the average goes up again. In conclusion, to conclude, this project allowed me to build a complete data pipeline using an external API, Python, SQLite, Pandas, and Matplotlib. The main finding from my analysis was that scoring more goals was directly associated with individual matches. However, the team level analysis showed that consistent success requires more than just scoring. Teams also need to limit the number of goals they concede. Overall, this project helped me understand how raw API data can be collected, stored, analyzed, and transformed into meaningful findings and visualizations. Thank you for taking the time to watching my presentation, and I appreciate your time.